June 18, 1815. While Napoleon Bonaparte and the Duke of Wellington clashed in the muddy fields of Waterloo, a single man rode through the darkness toward the English Channel. He carried no weapon, no dispatch from the battlefield, but the information in his head would become the most valuable commodity in Europe. In less than 24 hours, one family would turn that information into a fortune worth $3 billion in today's money. This is the story of how the Battle of Waterloo made the Rothschilds the most powerful banking dynasty in history. Nathan Meyer Rothschild stood on the floor of the London Stock Exchange watching the chaos around him. British government bonds were fluctuating wildly. Every merchant, every lord, every banker in London wanted the same thing: to know who won at Waterloo, Wellington or Napoleon. The future of Europe hung in the balance, and so did every pound sterling in the British Empire. But Nathan already knew something they didn't. The Rothschild Information Network was the most sophisticated private intelligence system in the world. Carrier pigeons, coded messages, trusted couriers stationed across Europe. While government dispatches took days to cross the channel, Rothschild agents moved at twice the speed. They had to, because in the world of high finance, information wasn't just power. Information was everything. And Nathan Rothschild was about to prove it. But how did a family of Jewish merchants from Frankfurt's ghetto become the financial masters of Europe? How did 5 brothers, scattered across 5 capitals, build an empire that would outlast empires? The answer begins 40 years earlier, in a cramped house on Judengasse, where Meyer Amschel Rothschild made a decision that would change history. The year was 1776. While America declared independence, Meyer Amschel Rothschild was dealing in rare coins and bills of exchange in Frankfurt. He understood something fundamental. Money doesn't care about borders, religions, or kings. Money flows where it's treated best. And wars, especially wars, created rivers of gold for those brave enough to navigate them. Meyer Amschel had 5 sons: Amschel, Solomon, Nathan, Carl, and James. Each brilliant, each ruthless. And each would be sent to a different European capital to establish a banking house: Frankfurt, Vienna, London, Naples, Paris. 5 nodes in a network that would move money faster than any government could track. But it was Nathan, the 3rd son, who would prove to be the most dangerous. Nathan Rothschild arrived in London in 1798 at age 21. He spoke broken English. He had no connections to British aristocracy. He was a German Jew in a city that barely tolerated Catholics. But within 15 years, Nathan would become the single most important financier in the British Empire. He did it by doing what others wouldn't: financing Britain's war against Napoleon. Between 1803 and 1815, Britain poured £831 million into the war against France, roughly $100 billion today. That money had to move across Europe to pay armies, bribe allies, and fund coalition forces. Banks refused. It was too dangerous, too complex, too risky. The Rothschilds said yes, and they built their empire on Wellington's war. The Rothschild method was simple, but revolutionary. Instead of physically transporting gold across war-torn Europe, which invited robbery, seizure, and loss, they used bills of exchange. A piece of paper in London became gold in Vienna. A promise in Paris became payment in Berlin. The Rothschild brothers essentially invented the modern international wire transfer, and they charged a premium for the service. By 1815, Nathan Rothschild had become indispensable to the British government. The Treasury needed him. Wellington needed him. Without Rothschild's financial network, Britain couldn't wage war. But this dependency created an asymmetry. The government needed Nathan more than Nathan needed the government. And Nathan understood leverage better than anyone alive. The financial instrument at the center of everything was the British government bond, called consols. These were promises to pay interest forever, backed by the British Empire. When Britain was winning, consols went up. When Napoleon gained ground, they collapsed. Every investor in London was essentially gambling on Wellington's survival. The bond market was a real-time referendum on Britain's fate. Nathan Rothschild owned millions in British consols. His fortune was tied directly to Wellington's success. If Napoleon won at Waterloo, the bonds would become worthless paper. If Wellington won, they'd soar. But Nathan had one advantage no other investor possessed. He would know the outcome before anyone else. And he had a plan to use that information in the most audacious financial play in history. June 15th, 1815. Napoleon crossed into Belgium with 120,000 men. Wellington scrambled to assemble a coalition force. The French emperor was making his final gamble. Everything depended on the next 3 days. In London, Nathan Rothschild activated his courier network. He stationed his most trusted agent, Rothworth, near the battlefield with one mission: get the news to England before anyone else. The normal route for military dispatches was Ostend to Dover, then London, about 36 hours if weather permitted. But Nathan had arranged something different. His courier would cross at the less patrolled port of Dunkirk, ride to Folkestone, and reach London via private coach. He'd arranged fresh horses at every stage. He'd paid harbor masters in advance. This wasn't just intelligence gathering. This was industrial espionage at national scale. June 18th, morning. The battle began in the mud-soaked fields south of Brussels. 73,000 British and Allied troops faced 72,000 French. Wellington positioned his forces on a ridge. Napoleon delayed his attack, waiting for the ground to dry so his artillery could move. That delay would cost him everything. But in London, no one knew any of this. The city held its breath. The fighting lasted 9 hours. French cavalry charged British squares again and again. Prussian reinforcements arrived just as Wellington's line was breaking. By evening, Napoleon's old guard, his elite veterans, made their final assault. They were repulsed. Napoleon fled. The French army dissolved into chaos. By 8 p.m., the battle was over. The most important military engagement of the century had ended, and a Rothschild agent witnessed it all. Within minutes, Rothworth was riding west. He had a sealed letter confirming Wellington's victory. He reached Dunkirk after midnight, paid triple rate for an immediate crossing despite storm warnings. The channel was rough, but by dawn on June 19th, he was on English soil. A relay of horses was already waiting. By the time the sun rose over London, Rothworth was 30 miles from the city. The official dispatch wouldn't arrive for another 24 hours. Early morning, June 20th, Nathan Rothschild received the message in his private study. Wellington had won. Napoleon was finished. British consuls were about to explode in value. But Nathan didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He put on his coat and walked to the stock exchange, because the real game was about to begin, and everything depended on what he did in the next 3 hours. The stock exchange opened at 10 a.m. Nathan took his usual position by a column, the spot where every trader could see him. London called it the Rothschild Pillar. When Nathan was bullish, he leaned forward. When bearish, he leaned back. Every movement was analyzed. This morning, every eye was on him. Did the Jew banker know something? Had his pigeons arrived? Nathan's face revealed nothing. Then, Nathan did something shocking. He began selling. Massive volumes of British consols dumped onto the market without explanation. Other traders panicked. If Rothschild was selling, Wellington must have lost. The bonds collapsed. Within an hour, consols had fallen 20%. Wealthy men were ruined. Fortunes evaporated. And Nathan kept selling, his face carved from stone. What no one realized was that his agents were simultaneously buying. The technique is now called bear raid manipulation. Nathan was publicly selling bonds through his own name, creating the appearance of insider knowledge, suggesting British defeat. But quietly, through dozens of anonymous agents and proxy buyers, he was purchasing those same bonds at rock-bottom prices. For every bond he sold at 100, his agents bought 2 at 50. It was perfectly legal and absolutely devastating. By noon, the market was in freefall. Consols were trading at 60% of their opening value. Aristocrats were selling family estates to cover losses. Banks were calling in loans. The British economy was melting down on rumors alone. Still no official word from Belgium. Still no confirmation. Just Nathan Rothschild selling and selling and selling. And through his network, secretly buying everything. Then, at 1 p.m., Nathan stopped. He stepped back from his pillar and walked out of the exchange without a word. The silence was deafening. Traders looked at each other in confusion. What did it mean? Had he received new information? The market hung suspended in terror, waiting for what would come next. But Nathan was already gone, returning to his office to wait for the official dispatch. The government courier arrived at 11 p.m. that night. Wellington had won. Napoleon was defeated. The news spread through London like wildfire. By midnight, church bells were ringing. By dawn, the city was celebrating. But there was no celebration at the stock exchange, because when trading opened on June 21st, every merchant realized what had happened and who had done it. Consoles skyrocketed. They recovered to 110 within hours, then kept climbing. Everyone who had panic sold the day before was wiped out. Everyone who bought at the bottom was wealthy beyond measure. And Nathan Rothschild owned more British government debt than any institution in England except the Bank of England itself. He'd turned $3 million into $40 million overnight, roughly $3 billion in today's purchasing power. But the psychological impact was greater than the money. Nathan had proven something terrifying. He could move markets through information alone. He could create panics. He could trigger crashes. He didn't need the British government. The British government needed him. From that day forward, no monarch, no treasury, no parliament would make major financial decisions without considering the Rothschilds' position. The British public was outraged. Pamphlets circulated accusing Nathan of treason, of profiting from British suffering, of manipulating the nation's economy for personal gain. Anti-Semitic cartoons depicted him as a vampire, draining England's wealth. There were calls for investigation, for prosecution. But nothing happened, because Nathan hadn't broken any laws. He'd simply played the game better than anyone else. Years later, Nathan would testify before Parliament. They asked him about his wealth, his methods, his intelligence network. He was evasive, dismissive, almost mocking. When pressed about whether he'd known about Waterloo before others, he smiled and said nothing. The committee had no power over him. He was wealthier than most members of Parliament combined. They could investigate, but they couldn't touch him. What made the Waterloo trade so perfect was its elegance. Nathan risked almost nothing. If Wellington had lost, he would have lost money, but no more than any other British investor. If Wellington won, which his inside information confirmed, he'd positioned himself to capture nearly unlimited upside. It was asymmetric warfare applied to finance. All reward, minimal risk. The perfect trade. Over the next decade, Nathan would lend £60 million to European governments, the equivalent of $7 billion today. He financed the Austrian Empire. He kept the Prussian government solvent. He became the invisible hand behind European politics. Kings borrowed from him. Revolutions were funded or crushed based on his decisions. The Rothschild family had become a shadow government, operating above national boundaries. Some historians claim Nathan didn't just profit from advanced knowledge. He actively manipulated British policy to ensure that knowledge would be valuable. That the Rothschilds had been funding both sides of the Napoleonic Wars, ensuring the conflict continued as long as possible. That peace was bad for business. War created debt. Debt created dependency. There's limited evidence for these claims, but the questions persist. Why did Nathan have such extraordinary access to military intelligence? Why did the British government tolerate his private courier network during wartime? Why was he never prosecuted for market manipulation when the mechanism was so obvious? The answers might lie in documents that have never been made public, or were destroyed long ago. What is documented is the aftermath. The Rothschild banking empire grew to dominate European finance for the next century. They financed the construction of railroads across Europe. They funded the Suez Canal. They became the primary financiers of industrialization. By 1850, the 5 Rothschild houses were estimated to control half of the world's wealth, a claim that's impossible to verify but reflects contemporary perception. The family's influence extended beyond economics into politics. They became kingmakers. In 1830, they helped install Louis Philippe as King of France. In 1871, they arranged the war reparations after the Franco-Prussian War, essentially setting the price of German unification. Bismarck, the architect of modern Germany, consulted with the Rothschilds before major policy decisions. This wasn't capitalism. This was financial feudalism. Nathan Rothschild himself died in 1836 at age 58, possibly from an infection. But his sons and grandsons continued the empire. They married strategically, always keeping wealth within the family. They bought palaces and estates across Europe. They collected art that would become museum centerpieces. They became aristocrats without needing titles, though they acquired plenty of those too. Baron Rothschild, Lord Rothschild. Their descendants walk among global elites today. The Waterloo legend grew with every retelling. By the 1840s, it had become a parable about Jewish financial power, used by both admirers and anti-Semites. Some praised Nathan's genius. Others saw sinister conspiracy. The truth is more complex. Nathan was neither hero nor villain. He was a product of his time, using the tools available to him in a system designed to favor those with capital and information. He just did it better than anyone else. What's often forgotten is the human cost. The merchants ruined on June 20th, 1815, were real people. Families lost generational wealth. Estates were foreclosed. Some committed suicide. Nathan's gain was their absolute destruction. This is the nature of zero-sum trading. Every winner requires equal losers. The bond market doesn't create value, it redistributes it. And that day, it redistributed an unprecedented amount to one family. The Rothschilds developed a reputation for discretion that borders on paranoia. They rarely gave interviews. They destroyed correspondence. They avoided public attention whenever possible. This secrecy fueled conspiracy theories that persist to this day. Theories about controlling central banks, manipulating gold prices, funding both sides of every war. Most of these theories are false, but the family's genuine power made them plausible. By the late 19th century, the Rothschild empire began to fragment. National branches developed different interests. French Rothschilds focused on wine and railroads. British Rothschilds entered politics and philanthropy. The advent of corporate finance and joint stock banking diluted their monopoly. The family remained wealthy beyond measure, but they were no longer the only game in town. New players were emerging: Morgan, Rockefeller, Carnegie. World War I devastated the European banking system, including Rothschild houses. The Russian Revolution cost them their assets in the East. Hyperinflation wiped out German holdings. The rise of nationalism made their multinational structure a liability rather than an asset. And the rise of fascism, fueled partly by anti-Rothschild propaganda, threatened their very existence. The Vienna House was seized by the Nazis in 1938. Several family members fled Europe. The irony is bitter. The family that profited from European wars was nearly destroyed by them. The banking dynasty that financed empires watched those empires collapse. The Rothschilds survived, but as a shadow of their former dominance. Today, Rothschild & Co. exists as a mid-sized investment bank, managing about $100 billion in assets. Impressive, but a fraction of Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan. The legend is larger than the reality. So what does the Waterloo trade teach us about today's financial system? First, information is the ultimate asset. In 1815, Nathan won because he knew something 24 hours before others. In 2025, high-frequency traders win because they know something 24 milliseconds before others. The technology changes, the principle doesn't. The closest thing we have to Nathan Rothschild today might be the hedge fund managers with private satellites and AI scraping social media for signals. Second, markets can be manipulated legally. Nathan's bear raid would be illegal today under securities fraud statutes. But similar tactics persist: pump and dump schemes, coordinated short attacks, algorithmic spoofing. The tools are different, but the game remains. Use superior information and capital to move markets in your favor. Regulation tries to catch up. It always lags behind innovation. It always will. Third, financial empires are fragile. The Rothschilds seemed invincible in 1850. By 1950, they were diminished. By 2025, they're footnotes, except in conspiracy theories. No dynasty lasts forever. Not the Medicis, not the Rothschilds, not the Morgans. Today's tech billionaires, Bezos, Musk, Zuckerberg, will eventually fade too. New fortunes will rise. The cycle continues. Only the names change. Fourth, conspiracy theories fill the gaps left by secrecy. The Rothschilds' discretion created space for wild speculation about their power. This pattern repeats today with every secretive organization: the Federal Reserve, Bilderberg Group, Davos Forum. Opacity breeds suspicion. And sometimes the suspicion is deserved. But more often, people prefer simple explanations, shadowy cabals, over the messy reality of diffuse power and competing interests. The real lesson of Waterloo isn't about the Rothschilds specifically. It's about systems. The system that allowed one man to profit from national crisis was designed by and for people with capital. Nathan didn't break the system. He mastered it. The system itself was the problem, and remains the problem. When information equals wealth, and wealth buys access to information, You create feedback loops that concentrate power regardless of regulation. There's a famous quote attributed to Nathan Rothschild, though its authenticity is disputed. I care not what puppet is placed on the throne of England. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply. Whether he said it or not, the quote captures a truth about financial power. Democracy means little when economic policy is controlled by unelected institutions. In 2008, during the financial crisis, governments bailed out banks with trillions in public money. The banks were too big to fail. Sound familiar? In 1815, Nathan Rothschild was too big to fail. The British government couldn't function without him. In 2025, the Federal Reserve can't function without JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Bank of America. We've replaced one oligopoly with another. The names changed, the structure didn't. Some argue that the Rothschild era was actually better. At least financial power was concentrated and visible. You knew who controlled the money. Specific families with names and addresses. Today, power is distributed across hedge funds, sovereign wealth funds, central banks, and algorithmic trading systems. It's harder to identify, harder to regulate, harder to hold accountable. Anonymity is the new aristocracy. The Waterloo trade happened 210 years ago. But if you look at financial news from the past week, you'll see echoes everywhere. Insider trading scandals, market manipulation allegations, wealth concentration reaching Gilded Age levels. The technology is different, the scale is different, but the fundamental dynamics, information asymmetry, leverage, and the conversion of knowledge into capital haven't changed at all. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Nathan Rothschild made $3 billion in a day by knowing something before everyone else. That single trade changed his family's trajectory for generations. It demonstrates the ultimate truth about wealth. It's not created, it's captured. Someone always pays. In Nathan's case, it was the British investors who panic sold. In 2008, it was taxpayers. The transfer of wealth from many to few is the hidden engine of capitalism. Waterloo just made it visible. We'll never know the complete truth about what happened on June 20th, 1815. The Rothschild archives remain largely closed. The key participants are long dead. What survives is the legend, and legends always grow larger than facts. But whether Nathan manipulated the market deliberately or simply capitalized on an opportunity, the outcome is the same. One of the greatest fortunes in history, built on a single day's information advantage. A fortune that shaped the next 2 centuries. So the next time you hear about a billionaire making a fortune overnight, remember Nathan Rothschild. Remember that massive wealth is rarely earned through labor or innovation alone. It's usually captured through asymmetry, better information, better access, better timing. The game hasn't changed in 210 years, only the players. And if you're watching from the outside, asking how they did it, you're probably not one of them. Because the first rule of financial power is, those who have it don't explain it. Thanks for watching, and thanks for all your likes, comments, and subscriptions. Let me know in the comments what you want me to cover next.